Welcome to Sacred Cow Shipyards, where no ship is safe from being slaughtered like a cow. One of the problems with pre-recording these f***ing episodes, because I do that now to make my existence easier, and we all know that I am all about making my existence easier anyways, one of the problems is sometimes I forget to mention things in the episodes that should be mentioned timely in the episodes. So we're going to backtrack a little bit right now and talk about a few things that happened that I posted about other places, but did not actually mention in the things that you humies listen to. First off, Sacred Cow Shipyards got a shout out from none other than Sarna.net. Now, again, for those of y'all who are not massive nerds like myself, Sarna is considered to be pretty much the premier source of Battletech and MechWarrior and everything else related to that universe information. They're pretty much the OG of Battletech. And, I mean, I'm not even that familiar with Battletech / MechWarrior, and when I saw the notification came in, I made some really uncharacteristic noises, so that was pretty cool. On the other end of the spectrum, Sacred Cow Shipyards now has a podcast. Although, when you think about it, Sacred Cow Shipyards has always basically been a podcast. I mean, yes, there are pretty pictures and blah, 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 so on and so forth, but really, mostly you can just listen to the episodes and get the general idea of what I'm talking about regardless, and now you can do, well, exactly that. It is currently available through Anchor.fm, I believe, which also propagates it to your Spotify system, so if you know what all those words mean, you can probably go find it. Additionally, it will be subscription only. It does require some additional work on my part, and since I am having to do some additional work, you get to pay for it. That's how the world works. Well, actually, that's how the universe works. So, get used to it. So, now, on with the show. Again, speaking about you humies and your fascination with doing crazy and stupid things. For about as long as humanity has existed, humans have wanted to whack that guy over there with a rock. It's basically just kind of built into your DNA. I want to hit that guy with a rock. So, of course, you started throwing rocks. It's a good start. Limited range and limited capacity and limited, mass. And then you started upgrading yourself. You started doing things like, bow and arrow, slings. Then you discovered gunpowder and it all went to shit. And then it came along the absolutely nutbag engineers from a country currently known on your planet as Germany. Now, I'm told that country has changed shape and name more times than some polymorphs I know, but right now it's Germany, so we're just going to go with that name just to make life so much easier. So anyways, back during your first not quite World War, Germany was trying to crank out battleships to do, warship type shit with, and fell behind on their production quotas or just weren't able to get them out in time for the cannons that had already shown up to be mounted on them. So some enterprising German went, what if we stuck those on the ground somewhere? And thus was born the 38cm Sierra Kilo Lima/45 Max, otherwise known as the Langer Max, which also means longer Max. Again, English is a Germanic language, so this is pretty straightforward. And it worked pretty well. It was a coastal defense gun. They stuck it in these concrete bunkers, and it was a fairly decent gun. Problem is, setting up concrete bunkers takes time, takes effort, and then they're a fixed position that can then be counterfired and, well, blown up on their own. So some other enterprising German went, hey, what if we stuck these on trains? And thus was born the E und the B, because I cannot pronounce either of those words that the E and the B are standing in for, so we're just going to go with that. And it basically boiled down to a naval cannon on two train cars, suspended by basically bridge structure between them. It's approaching fully f***y at this point, and then we did achieve fully f***y! Allow me to introduce you to the Paris gun, which is what happens when yet another enterprising German goes, hey, we're burning out these 38cm cannon barrels. How about we drop a sleeve down them, extend them, stick them on a fixed concrete turntable, use some complicated engineering to hold the barrel up because it is so long and so heavy at this point, it would just droop under its own load, and then literally shoot a projectile the highest a human has ever shot a projectile before that point. And then you have the Paris gun. I mean, honestly, this whole thing is a nightmare contraption, but I love one specific detail about it, aside from the fact that it did set the record for altitude of a human-launched thing, and then it still holds the record for the furthest an artillery gun has ever launched a projectile. So bear in mind, again, this is during your First World War, so that's pretty significant. No, what I love about this thing is it was made out of burned out barrels. Barrels that had the rifling stripped away from them by being shot too much. So they dropped the sleeve down, it reduced its barrel diameter, and then they realized that they were just going to keep burning out the barrel again, so they actually produced numbered sequential shells for it that got progressively larger over time. Now, I guess I should do a slight deviation here, too, to have a slight explanation of how firearms work in general from your smallest to your largest in this particular aspect for those of y'all who are, again, are not super nerds like myself. Basically, most gun barrels are what's called rifled. The barrels are, in fact, a tube, and they have a spiral going down them that is cut in, or it might be formed in. There's all kinds of different ways to make rifling. But this rifling, this spiral surface on the inside of it, is what allows a projectile to be spin stabilized as it leaves the barrel. And spin stabilization makes life a lot easier. The trick is the lands and the grooves, that is to say the parts of the rifling that stick into the barrel versus the part of the rifling that is basically at the same diameter as the barrel, those would allow gas to escape past the projectile you're trying to launch down the barrel, which of course, obviously, is bad. You solve this problem by something called obturation. Basically, you force the metal of the projectile to fill in the grooves. Now, for smaller projectiles, for your handguns and pistols and whatever the hell else, that's accomplished by the explosive charge going off behind them and it forcing the projectile into the lands and grooves. And if you look at a spent round, you'll see how it has the rifling kind of cut into it. For bigger cannons, like for this fucking insanity right here, they use something called copper driving bands. And basically, these are literally bands of copper around the steel shell of the projectile that get rammed into the rifling when the gun is loaded. The thing is, the projectiles were coming out of the barrel at somewhere around 1,700 meters per second, which is almost 6,000 kilometers an hour, or about 3,700 miles an hour. 3,700 miles an hour out of a World War I cannon. Holy fuck! So yeah, even with the copper driving bands, the sheer muzzle velocity of this redonkulousness required that they custom-made a series of about 64 shells that got progressively larger over time because they were literally burning out their barrel. That's just absurd. Oh, and then it gets worse. When they got done with the barrel, they would actually send it back to the manufacturer, and he'd do the same thing over again. They'd drop a sleeve down it, make a new set of custom rounds, and send it back off to the front again, because fuck, it works, right? And then, because oh the fuck no, we are not fucking done yet, your Germany country learned its lessons from its longer max and its Paris gun for the second not quite World War, of course. And basically, the big lesson learned is our last two big old fucking cannons ate their barrels. Can we maybe avoid that this time? And in their credit, they did. They ended up making some custom rounds that were specifically shaped to fit into the lands and grooves of the cannon. And then it just needed a gas seal as opposed to the copper driving band. And the barrel life was suddenly so much better. Now, of course, the projectiles were a lot more expensive to make, but the whole thing is just going to be fucking expensive. Come on! Now, the best part of this story is that this, now, what are we up to? Third generation big old fucking gun, the otherwise known as the Kilo 12. Yeah, it couldn't match the range of the Paris gun. I shit you not. That recycled, repurposed, ambulatory fucking nightmare could throw around 81 miles. Whereas the upgraded, so much better, so much longer lasting, so cool, it's always meant to be on a rail, blah, 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 so on and so forth. K-12? Yeah, it could only do 71 miles. I mean, yeah, only 10-mile difference, but still, think about that for a second. The K-12 was custom built to be a long-range cannon, whereas the Paris gun was a fucking claptrap, kit-bashed nightmare. And it ended up shooting things farther. Now, the K-12 did have much larger, much more capable rounds also, which probably affected the outcome too, but still. And, naturally, the Germans weren't satisfied with this situation, because, I mean, who would be? Who wants the duct tape together, held together by chewing gum and baling wire disaster of a thing to be better than your, oh my god, so cool thing? So, there was a fourth generation, oddly named the V3. Now, I'm reasonably sure that most of y'all are familiar with the V1 and the V2, although given the state of your education systems, I'm not too certain, but we're going to go ahead and gloss right past them. Now, the Vergeltungswaffe 3 is basically what happens when you get a bunch of German eggheads drunk off their goddamn asses from beer being served to them by anatomically improbable beer maidens, and someone starts going, "Hey man, you know what would make a bullet go faster? If there were more guns pushing it along!" And I'm pretty sure I'm not actually exaggerating that much. The V3 operates off that very principle. There was an initial charge at the end of a barrel that started to launch a projectile. And then as the projectile made its way down its barrel, being pushed by all the hot gases behind it, those hot gases would leak into chambers on either side of the barrel that had additional charges in them. And then those would go off. And then the next one would go off. And then the next one would go off. And it was literally a staged gun. Now, what's funny, really funny to me personally, because you humies just do things in such weird ways sometimes, is your United States of America had proposed this notion back in 1860. In fact, your United States Army Chief of Ordnance actually ordered one of these to be built. It didn't work so great because, amusingly, their obturation, remember that word? Didn't work so great itself, so the hot gases behind the projectile would suddenly get in front of the projectile, which would set off the charges on either side of the projectile in front of it, which would slow it down. So, yeah, the whole project was actually abandoned. On top of that, just 4 years later, some French guy who would later be known to be essential in the development of the motorcycle got a patent for the same kind of idea, just in France. So this idea is really old, had been worked on in parallel but totally disconnected by two different countries previously who weren't quite able to get it work, and then the Germans came along and, well, amusingly, sadly, they did not get it to work so well either. The goal was to shoot a shell approximately 100 miles, give or take a little, which would be much longer than even the Paris gun could have accomplished. And in fact, the Germans did actually think about this a little more than maybe the Americans and the French did. And instead of using explosive charges on the ancillary quote-unquote barrels, they used solid rocket propellant, which provides a similar amount of force just stretched out, which reduces the chamber pressures, which makes things, not explode randomly. Although, sadly, this whole system did have a tendency to explode quite randomly. In fact, the farthest it ever actually managed to shoot, which was 58 miles, during that shot, the gun burst. So, no more testing on that one. All right. I can hear all the whining from here, and given how far away Earth is, it's kind of impressive. All I'm hearing is, when the f*** are you gonna get to the point? Get to the point! Get to the point! And I guess I should do exactly that. The point is this. Like I said, throwing rocks at the other guy is genetically programmed into you humies. It is functionally unavoidable. And it's even better when you can throw the rocks farther, right? Because then you can hit some other humie farther away, right? Well, when humanity finally escapes the grasp of Mother Earth and goes off into space, apparently y'all still haven't managed to get past, I want to hit some guy with a rock really fucking far away. Which apparently led to the existence of the Long Tom artillery system in the Battletech / Mech Warrior universe. Now, before we get any farther, I have to take a moment about the name. Y'all humies actually already had a Long Tom artillery piece. It's the 155mm gun Mark I. It was a pretty good gun, actually. It was kind of your United States' big first step from really shitty artillery during World War I to massively better artillery in World War II. The funny thing about it, though, is this Long Tom did not have a tremendously great range. The Battletech Long Tom's range is yes. Now, what's intriguing about the Long Tom is that they don't appear to be cheating like you humies have been trying to do with your artillery and basically launching rockets out of your artillery pieces, which of course naturally massively extends the range of your artillery pieces. No, the Long Tom just seems to be a straight-up artillery piece. It shoots an inert shell. Well, not an inert shell. It shoots a number of high-explosive, armor-penetrating, illumination, anti-personnel, smoke, copperhead, flechette, blah, 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 cluster, oh my god, we're all dying rounds. But you get my point. They're not helping themselves fly or anything. And while the Terran Long Tom was categorized as a heavy artillery piece, in fact it was pretty powerful for its time, the Battletech Long Tom can take out a light mech with a single shot. Just one shot him. Done. There he goes. Dead. Bye-bye now. Now, on the flip side, the probability of a light mech standing still long enough to actually land a long tom shot on is pretty low, but they also have a decent splash radius too, so it's kind of a mixed bag. Now, my favorite part of the long tom, which is kind of weird, I'll admit right up front, it's big. It's fucking huge. It's in fact so big that the biggest mech in MechWarrior can only mount one of them. And that even is kind of a stretch depending on what rule set you're using. In fact, there's a dropship that, again, only mounts one of them. And it's the big daddy of the Union dropship we talked about previously. And then the normal application of the Long Tom is by way of a 6-vehicle train that looks remarkably like a series of vehicles that you humans experimented with about, 60 or so years ago. In fact, there were multiple different designs, multiple different applications, multiple different ideas, and none of them actually came to fruition in the end, but they're all fucking hysterically awesome. So yeah, when humanity finally gets to the stars, and finally gets beyond your tiny little blue pebble in space, and finally gets out there and does interesting things, and finally has ships that are capable of crossing interstellar distances in the blink of an eye, and finally has the combat mechs they've always wanted to go stomping around in, and finally does all this crazy shit, I am heartened by the fact that you will never abandon your fucking monkey mentality of I really, really, really want to throw shit at that other monkey. And also your love of trains, whether they're on rails or not. Honestly, I mean, that really doesn't happen outside of humanity, so I'm not really sure what kind of, psychedelic shit you guys are smoking, but hey, at least you kind of stick with it. Good for y'all for that. And now for something completely different, courtesy of one of your fellow fans.
On a dark solar highway, coolant on my chair, warm smell of dune spice rising up through the air. Up ahead in the distance, I saw a shimmering tube. My head grew heavy and I stayed too long. My ship's compressed to a cube. There he stood in the hatchway. I heard the quarterdeck bell. And I was hoping to myself they have a spare fuel cell. Then he lit up a thruster and took me on my way. There were voices down the corridor. I thought I heard them say, "Welcome to the sacred cow shipyards." Such a lovely place. Such a lovely space. Plenty of docks at the sacred cow shipyards. Any time of year, you can find it here. His mind is dockmaster twisted. He's got the cathode ray tube. He's got a lot of pretty, pretty ships he calls cubes. How they crush in the shipyard, sweet searing jets. Some crushed to remember, others crushed to forget. So I call up the captain, "Please bring me my ship." He said, "We've already crushed it. Or did you forget?" And still those voices are calling from far away. Wake you up in the middle of the night just to hear them say, "Welcome to the sacred cow shipyards." Such a lovely place. Such a lovely space. They're living it up at the sacred cow shipyards. What a nice surprise. Bring your alibis. Mirrors on the portholes. Humigu in tubes. And he said, "We are all just prisoners here of our own crushed cubes." In the dockmaster's chamber, they stare at you tube. They stab it with their steely knives, but they just can't kill the cube. Last thing I remember, I was running for the hatch. Had to find the passage back, had to get my ship detached. Relax, said the minion, we are programmed to receive. You can undock anytime you like, but you can never leave.
And that's all from Sacred Cow Shipyards. Please be advised that any ship left on the dock for more than 24 hours will be compressed to a cube at the owner's expense. Have a nice day.